Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, an innocent man and prisoner of conscience, kidnapped in Kenya and held in the Nigerian DSS dungeon. Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, IPOB, has become a symbol of self-determination, resilience, and political persecution. His case has drawn international attention, raising concerns about human rights abuses, illegal extradition, and the suppression of free speech in Nigeria. Despite being a British citizen and a political activist advocating for the rights of the Igbo people and the restoration of Biafra, he was abducted in Kenya in June 2021, subjected to extraordinary rendition, and has since been held in solitary confinement in the custody of Nigeria's Department of State Services, DSS. His plight reflects the broader struggle for justice, the rule of law, and respect for fundamental human rights in Nigeria. The abduction in Kenya, a blatant violation of international law. On June 19, 2021, Mazi Nnamdi Kanu was illegally abducted in Nairobi, Kenya, under circumstances shrouded in secrecy and brutality. Reports indicate that he was tortured, denied legal representation, and forcefully transported to Nigeria without due process. The process of his extraordinary rendition violated international human rights treaties, including the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and the United Nations Convention Against Torture, both of which Nigeria is a signatory to. Legal experts and human rights organizations have decried this act as a gross violation of international law, which stipulates that no individual should be forcibly removed from one country to another without undergoing a legal extradition process. The Kenyan government has remained largely silent on its role in the operation, despite mounting evidence that state agents were complicit in his abduction. The DSS dungeon, torture, solitary confinement, and injustice. Following his forced return to Nigeria, Mazi Nnamdi Kanu has been held in solitary confinement at the DSS headquarters in Abuja, where reports indicate he has been subjected to inhumane treatment. His health has reportedly deteriorated due to the harsh conditions, denial of medical care, and psychological torture inflicted upon him by the Nigerian authorities. Numerous court rulings, including a landmark decision by the Court of Appeal in Abuja in October 2022, have declared his detention illegal and unconstitutional. The court ruled that his extraordinary rendition from Kenya rendered all charges against him null and void. Despite this, the Nigerian government has refused to release him, further fueling accusations of executive lawlessness and judicial impunity. The struggle for Biafra, a peaceful quest for self-determination. Nnamdi Kanu is the leader of IPOB, a movement that seeks the peaceful restoration of the Republic of Biafra, which briefly existed from 1967 to 1970. The Biafran War resulted in the deaths of over 3 million people, mostly due to starvation, following a devastating blockade imposed by the Nigerian government. Kanu has consistently maintained that his agitation is non-violent and rooted in international law, which upholds the right to self-determination. His movement has used media advocacy, including Radio Biafra, to amplify the plight of the Igbo people, who have long complained of marginalization, discrimination, and systemic oppression in Nigeria. Despite his peaceful approach, the Nigerian government has labeled IPOB a terrorist organization, a move widely criticized as unjustified and politically motivated. Many have pointed out that groups engaged in actual violence, such as Boko Haram and bandits terrorizing northern Nigeria, have not faced the same level of persecution as IPOB. International condemnation and calls for his release. Kanu's continued detention has sparked widespread condemnation from international human rights groups, legal experts, and political figures. Organizations such as Amnesty International and the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention have criticized Nigeria's actions, calling for his immediate release. The British government, of which Kanu is a citizen, has faced pressure to intervene more decisively. However, its response has been tepid, raising questions about its commitment to protecting its citizens abroad. Many observers believe that geopolitical interests and diplomatic considerations have led to a lack of urgency in addressing the injustice surrounding Kanu's detention. A prisoner of conscience, the symbol of resistance. Mazi Nnamdi Kanu's ordeal has transformed him into a prisoner of conscience, a term used to describe individuals jailed for their beliefs, peaceful activism, or political stance. His continued incarceration is not just a legal matter, but a moral one, highlighting Nigeria's deteriorating human rights record and its resistance to democratic principles. Despite the harsh conditions he endures, Kanu's resolve remains unshaken. His detention has further galvanized the Biafran independence movement as more people rally behind the cause of self-determination. His plight has also exposed the Nigerian government's tactics of repression and disregard for legal processes, reinforcing the need for greater accountability and democratic reforms. The path forward: justice and freedom. The release of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu is not just a demand by his supporters, but a necessary step toward upholding justice, human rights, and the rule of law. The Nigerian government must comply with court rulings that have declared his detention illegal and immediately release him without conditions. The international community must intensify its pressure on the Nigerian government to respect legal and human rights standards. Diplomatic channels, economic sanctions, and human rights advocacy must be leveraged to ensure that Kanu is granted his freedom. His continued imprisonment is an affront to democratic values and a dangerous precedent for political activism in Nigeria. If left unchallenged, it could embolden further acts of state repression against those who dare to speak against injustice. Conclusion: Mazi Nnamdi Kanu is not a criminal. He is a political prisoner whose only crime is advocating for the self-determination of his people. His illegal abduction, continued detention, and inhumane treatment are stark reminders of the challenges facing those who challenge oppressive systems. As the world watches, the fight for his release must continue. His case is not just about Biafra or Nigeria. It is about the fundamental right of all people to speak freely, advocate for their beliefs, and demand justice without fear of persecution. The struggle for Nnamdi Kanu's freedom is a fight for justice, truth, and the very essence of human dignity. He must be freed.